I work in the NHS and I'm a Unison rep, but also since 2020 I've been involved with NHS Workers Say No. And I'm going to talk about why we need to organise with our unions, but why we also need to organise separately from our unions as well, if we need to. So I'll start by saying how I got involved with NHS Workers Say No. So in 2020, the NHS faced, obviously everyone knows, a really horrific time. And NHS workers were some of the few going to work while people around the country were on lockdown. And I think that's one of the first times that I really saw the limitations of our unions, because imagine this, I'm going into work, I'm faced with infectious patients on our wards dying in droves, and we were in chaos, we didn't know what PPE was right, it was terrifying, and Boris Johnson in power didn't help things at all. I really expected Unison to shine at this stage, because I had perceived them as being the union of health and safety, and that's what I thought. This is one of the things they're really good at, and I was expecting them to, come to our rescue a bit, I suppose. But instead, I found they shut their offices and their call centres because they didn't want to. Rightly so, I suppose, they didn't want to put their paid staff at risk, but that meant that we weren't able to get support from them. And imagine how I felt as a frontline NHS worker. I didn't have that option to stay at home and protect myself, and it left me feeling under-supported. So health and safety advice on PPE and safety precautions, we were looking into that ourselves as NHS workers. We were reading things, we were sharing the research online, and the reps in the branch were having to go to the hospital management and beg for better PPE without support, I suppose, from the union more widely. And I had a really bad time, like a lot of people, and it completely changed the way that I would relate to unions forever. And a few months later, we've been working with COVID patients all this time. We hear the government doesn't want to give us a pay rise. And I heard that NHS workers were gathering at Downing Street to protest, and I went down and I joined in, because we were disgusted. We'd been having the fight of our life at work, and the government was just counting it for nothing.
I want the Workers' Summit to be a day where people can discuss, and that everybody feels that they get to have something to say. So it's a bit unconventional, and I know we're not all sat around tables, but we have got a question for discussion. It's a sort of in part. So the question really is for people here to reflect on where they are. So in their union branch or in their workplace, maybe there isn't a union yet. Maybe that's where you are. Maybe there's a big union branch that you're part of and you're the secretary of. Maybe, you know what I'm saying. What do things look like around you? What does the movement look like around you? And then what good things have happened over the last year that have been created in the grassroots. And I think that there'll be so many people in this room who will give really good examples of grassroots activity that has happened in their area, that hasn't just been something that's been called for, but has been the sort of stuff that Carly talked about, ordinary workers deciding that they're going to do something. So if you could discuss that, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to have a series of hands of anybody that wants to talk about what they discussed. So it's not points and questions or whatever, it's answers to that question that you had in your little group of people around you. Not just the person next to you, but if you need to move around, just do that. So over to you. We've got about 5 minutes for this bit, so.
It's slightly changed because I've listened to these stories up here and I feel I need to say something and I've been led to believe that it's the right thing to do. I'm a strong believer with my wife that everything happens for a reason, and when I was invited down here, on that day, it was the day we shut Amazon down somehow from over there and break a file. We shut it down and all we did we invite some friends over for the chat. And the bosses inside Coventry cannot make that call to shut the fulfilment centre down. It has to come from either Luxembourg or Seattle. So someone with a lot of power made that call. When we rocked up there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, people were coming out, and I said to a few people that I knew, "What's going on?" And they said, "They've sent us home. They've sent us home." Now, this is probably where I'll get into trouble and get excommunicated more. It was a decision that we made. I put it to GMB, and GMB said no, because it could be dangerous, let's not do it. But something had to be done. Everything we've done so far, Amazon still haven't spoken to us or spoken to the union. They keep speaking to me constantly. But we shut it down. The 5 days of action we had in March, 13, 14, 15, 16 and 17, had a major impact on them. From that day forward, they're constantly doing or pushing for over 1 million items a day. And before it used to be about 500, 600,000. So they're constantly pushing in the readiness because they know sooner or later they're going to hit them again. So jealous of the traffic wardens, but that's what it happens. When you put your foot down, you say, no, this is not right. We're not having this anymore. And you walk out. That took a lot of courage. I mean, I always said that the first Amazonians to walk out of Coventry were the bravest people I ever met. But knowing that people on a low income, living in London, to walk away and say, no, that's it. That took real courage. And I'm so jealous that I'm not 15k now. But this is what we have to do. It takes me back to when we had the first conversation, when I had the first conversation, when they gave us the 50 pence. Little Sally came and whispered in my ear and said, say something to everyone because they will listen to you. I think it's the age thing. And he said they'll listen to you, and I grabbed a Red Bull and a cigarette and I went out the way and I thought about it. Because I've always been not a troublemaker, but I've always tried to lead things and push things. Not a coward, but I always give the baton to somebody else to take the lead. It's shy, I think. But when I was out there drinking a Red Bull and taking a nicotine shot, a question came to me. And the question was, if not now, when? And we have to ask ourselves now, in this room. And I'm intimidated today because the more and more I meet you, I'm stood up here with doctors, teachers, nurses, physios, traffic wardens. I know what you do for a living, and I'm classed as unskilled work, and now, 2 years ago, it was essential. But if not now, if not now, when? When are we going to do this? We need to stand together. We need to stand together. I know GLB are unhappy with me, but I did what I thought was right. 1 day of action, we've seen it, and no, if there's any post-media, it's no disrespect to them. But they did what? Was it 8 days over like 9 months? 18. But it needs to roll forward, doesn't it? It needs more. It needs to be like a traffic rules and say no. No, it needs to be like some locals who say no, we're not doing this for that. And they walked out, and they walked out consistently and stayed out. And what did they get? They got what they asked for. They got what they asked for. So I say to you now, let's push this forward. Let's get these fights together. I'll come and stand anywhere. But what we need to do as well, and this was part of the original speech, I want more Amazon sites out. It's very lonely in Coventry, apart from when our friends come and see us. We need more fulfilment centres out. Now what I'm planning to do, because I've been inspired by people here, and people I know back in Coventry, and people that have had my back over the last few months, I'm going to start coming out to other fulfilment centres. I'm going to go around the country, doing GMB, bless them, and they've done so well for us so far, sort of. But it took them 10 years to get Rugeley, and they didn't even get Rugeley, they got us, and that's because we, the grassroots, the rank and file, walked out, and GMB were there. I'm going to go there. As much as I want to say that union leadership's great, people don't want to join the union because it's 15 quid. I know I'm not famous, but people know who I am because I've got a big mouth and a fat head. But I know I can go and speak to these people because I'm living their life. I'm living their life and I'm on the same wage as them. So I'm going to go around, I'm going to leaflet these people, and I'm going to get other fulfillment centres out, and we are going to be
Just really wanted to say that there's three things to today, isn't there? Like the fights, reject bad deals, and fight to win. And it's obviously not a rah-rah moment we're in right now, is it? You know, lots of us are here, we're not bloody happy, you know, unless of course we're diagonal, wherever he's gone, then wherever he's fine, absolutely bloody brilliant. And the one thing we do need to shout to the rooftops about is the victory of Camden traffic ward was to win an inflation busting pay deal in the context that we've been in over all these months of fights over pay. Absolutely bloody brilliant. So we need to go on and make sure everybody possibly knows about that. Because the one thing we know about as a bourgeois media are not going to be publicising that for us, are they? So we need to make sure that people know that when you fight all out and you go indefinite, then there's a very, very good chance that you're actually going to win. Okay, so let's get to the serious stuff. The situation that we're in, like the fights, is very different to what it was last summer, isn't it? You know, last summer, I'm talking about a year ago last summer, we had these amazing Enough is Enough rallies. Do you remember them? Do you remember we all came together across the unions and said, let's unite, let's fight together? You know, good sense, you might call that. Unfortunately, I can't remember these anymore. It seems like a very distant memory when we were united and all together. I also feel like a distant memory when we were all marching together with the NEU last March, you know, when we were fighting together. It really felt a sense of our power, that glimpse of what was possible. And it does feel again a very long time ago. So let's get to the UCU, the University and College Union. The reason I'm here really is because the University and College Union is where these contradictions have been at their biggest, right? The contradiction between union leaders who really think that the main thing in life is to negotiate the first possible deal you can get, rather than to find what members voted for and you know, organised for, and instead start to sell the first rotten possible deal. Well, the UC has gone one worse than that, because instead of actually having a deal, and I'm talking about our leaders, by the way, not the rank and file, our leadership has pulled a first in the history of the trade union movement, because in a national dispute in higher education, with a national strike, and the national strike dates called, they suddenly decided to put it to branches to decide whether they were going to come out and strike or not. So, in other words, you can decide not to go and strike despite the fact that we've got a national dispute. Absolutely appalling situation where people have been left to fight their own and think, well, how am I going to vote if I don't know the branch next door is going to strike? Are we going to be on the run or what? And of course, what's that meant? It's meant that actually lots of branches that should have been going out to strike next Monday are not going to be out to strike next Monday. Now, having said all that, I want to say the good bloody news is that, as far as I know, it's hard to keep up to date because the figures were coming yesterday. 52 UCU branches in higher education are going to be able to strike next Monday. And some of them are even going to stay for the full 5 days, which is absolutely incredible given the circumstances. And we don't like, when we strike hard students. You know, a lot of what we do, the NHS and everybody else, you work with school, you don't like hard people you work for. But the truth of the matter is that we don't have any choice, so we need to organise more effectively, we need harder hitting action if we're going to be able to win. And this is where I want to pay tribute to Brighton, colleagues at Brighton UCU who are here today. College Union branch has been on strike now for 12 weeks. They're about to come into the 13th week of all-out, indefinite strike action. And that's going to take to stop that in the right time. We don't have time, really. The thing about it is that when somebody gets sacked, somebody gets made redundant, then everybody has to fight for them, don't they? That's the simple thing about what has been a trade union. So, what about the UCU Solidarity Movement? Well, the UCU Solidarity Movement started because we recognised that we had a fundamental difficulty in our union. The General Secretary before the one that we currently have decided to cancel our annual union congress, which was going to be subject to a vote of no confidence. This was way back in May 2018, after she tried to sell a really rotten deal in our national pensions dispute way back then. We had a massive demonstration outside UCU headquarters, and as a consequence of that was our head of steam bill up across the union to say, we want a General Secretary that represents us. The problem is that our current General Secretary is actually one worse than that, and is constantly trying to undermine our fight ever since a body of our union voted for indefinite action way back in November, because we knew that one-day strikes here and there are not enough, that you need to actually put together the strength of your members and fight as effectively as possible in terms of the determination of the members to fight. So effectively, what is the issue of solidarity movement? It is a beginnings of a rank and file movement. Now, let's be honest here, we don't have a rank and file movement in this room. We've got the beginnings of a rank and file network across the unions. And therefore we have an ambition, don't we, to be much, much bigger than that. Because if we recognise, and here's my last point, I mean, just to say about the issue of solidarity movement, it's not a political affiliation essentially, it's about solidarity, it's about bringing people together. When people fight, my union branch and two other union branches got together because we were all in the situation of having to fight the fight on our own and we weren't being effectively supported by our union. So we set up this network 3 years ago. We've now got 1,500 subscribers across the whole union. We've got a WhatsApp group, 150 people, we've had 200 people, we've actually forced the General Secretary to come and speak at our meetings on several occasions, last 2 sentences. And that's because actually they recognise that the rank and file in our union are a constant threat to their attempts to sell dirty deals. So I think that the key of the matter is, we need to talk the talk, but we actually have to walk the walk as well. So it's good enough to talk about solidarity, but we actually have to deliver it. So if you're in London this Thursday, then there's going to be a lot of universities out in strike over pay this Thursday, and we all know that what we have to do that makes us stronger is to fight together. And if there's something that's fantastic, that's in your own picket line, somebody from another workplace come along and say, I support you and I'm here representing this workplace, and we'd really love you to come and speak at our branch meeting, we'd really love to make a donation to your fight as well, because your fight wins, then our fight wins, we all feel confident, we all get a better chance of winning together. So that's what this is all about, isn't it? The point of the matter is, there's an old slogan for the Clyde Workers Committee, I've said it before, and that is, it goes something like this. If the trade union leaders act in our interest, then we'll support them. But insofar as they don't act in their interest, then we'll act independently. And that's what we have to do. We have to organise the independent organisations, basically our union, because we know that the can't allow the union to do that, and we still have to organise it.
During our PGCE that joining a union is just for insurance purposes. And that's a good idea. I have obviously since learned that a union, especially a campaigning union like the NEU, is so much more. My union has become my family. I soon learned of a London network for young and new professionals. Joining this group and becoming a key organiser really changed my perspective on how groups like ours can really affect change in education across the country. We had already formed a close-knit, well-organised group when the strike started. We knew straight away that as younger members of the union, we'd have an essential part to play. The workforce is getting younger, and we were able to capitalise on new communication streams, reaching a wider audience and encouraging younger members to organise in their workplaces. Strikes gave confidence to young workers like me, ones who once felt they could not affect change in their workplaces, and yet, here we were out screaming in the streets and organising picket lines, setting up social media accounts and writing motions for conferences. We realised that we are the union. We control the narrative. Our socials were a smashing success, with young striking members reaching out for advice on how to organise their members and actions they can take to keep members motivated during the slow periods. We became branch officers, reinvigorating districts with young and black members that better represent the workplace and the membership. When we were told about that final offer from the government and encouraged to accept the deal from the leadership, We met as a committee and voted unanimously to reject the deal and campaign for a no-vote. We took a lot of inspiration from the NHS Workers Say No campaign, so thank you. Thank you very much, guys. We had members of the leadership commenting on our socials, asking us who gave us the right to promote a reject vote, and I remember reading that. This was intimidating, but we stood our ground. We knew we'd made the right decision. We weren't successful in getting enough members to reject the deal, but our strike actions delivered so much for us as a network. We are now confident, prepared, and ready for the next fight. Going forward, this network has a lively year planned with a growing committee and ideas to secure better deals for ourselves. We are setting up motion writing workshops for young members. We'll be writing motions to circulate amongst branches. We are planning conference, fringe meetings and what we fight for next. We are encouraging younger members to join branches and attend GMs. We are setting up networking events with young workers from other unions to unite our struggles. Ultimately, we are getting ourselves ready for the battle ahead. If our union won't start action on the next round of pay deals or workload reduction, we will. Thank you for listening.
My name is Faizi Ismail. I teach at Goldsmiths and I was on the exec for many years.
Yeah, and you made a cracking speech out on the floor earlier about the situation with the Ukrainian conflict and our recent involvement with trade unions. What do you think is the situation there and what should it be in your opinion?
Well, I mean, we are divided, in the mainstream, I guess, in wider society on this question because we have a government that is, where all their media and all the propaganda is around fighting this war. This is the just war. This is the war for freedom, and so on. And with comparisons to Vietnam and so on. And so, we have a situation where Europe is increasing arms spending, where to levels that we haven't seen in a very long time, and we can't have a situation where we now have financial crisis, we have cost of living crisis, we have fuel crisis, fuel poverty, and climate crisis. We can't have a situation where we're fighting more war with the potential for nuclear war. This is the most dangerous time ever. The idea, nobody trusts Putin, and if we don't trust Putin, we certainly don't trust him with nuclear weapons. Neither do we trust Biden or NATO to provoke wider war. So we are in a very, very dangerous situation. And in that situation, the trade union movement, workers in this country, across Europe, across the world, have a central role in saying, no, war is not in our interest. And actually, we know that much of the global south, the African Union has already said, we don't support this war, or we don't sort of either take a position, or we don't think that this war is in the interests of our countries and our people. So, we have to be in that tradition that says, in the internationalist tradition that said no to the First World War, no to the Second World War, to war where workers have to pay in the end. And we are back in that situation again, and as I say, in a very, very dangerous place.
Absolutely. And in terms of your experience in the trade union movement, would you say that's a popular perspective? Is that something you see?
So, yeah, it's interesting because I think when you talk to people privately, they will say, I don't agree, and actually we could be spending that money on better things. We could be spending on education, on health, on all the things that people need. There are enough crises in this country to where we can have that money for things that people really need. So I think that position, it's something like 25% of the population that is now on the anti-war side, but I think it's actually more in real life. I think in reality, I think, as I say, the government has spent a lot of effort on trying to convince people that this is the right thing to do, and so it's a divisive position really, and we've clearly seen the TUC vote. Would
you say there's a lot of pressure coming from senior trade unionists to get on board with this war?
I would say there is, but when we raise it and we have discussions, I think people are convinced. Quite a lot of people are convinced, and so I think we need to continue to have debates. This is a debate. It's not one side or the other. I think it is important to really get through these questions. And I say take a position that is internationalist, anti-war.
Yeah.
And so on.
You mentioned Stop the War earlier inside. Do you think they've taken an appropriate line on this conflict at the moment?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And what they're saying is that we condemn the Russian invasion, absolutely. We also condemn NATO aggression, and we also condemn, the fact that NATO has expanded in the last 15 to 20 years. And that is an issue. We can't ignore that history. And so it's not a question of just, saying that NATO is secondary. This is a proxy war. It is a war that is being fought out in Ukraine. Ukrainian lives are at stake, so are Russian lives. But if this escalates, and if it escalates to nuclear war, it's unthinkable. So I think really, trade unionists have an absolutely central role in raising these questions in our branches, in the wider trade union movement, and really trying to affect an anti-war position in mainstream society.
In practical terms, do you have any ideas as to what people from rank and file workers all the way up to senior members of the trade union movement can do to affect that change?
I think, when we raise questions, I said, UCU voted at our Congress in favour of the anti-war position. It was UCU comrades at University of Brighton that raised the motion, and I think that's what we need to do. And yeah, people might not like it, but we need to have that debate, we need to have that discussion. And when we have it, then people start to shift, or at least positions are clarified, and that's really important because, as I say, I don't think we can have a position where we're on the same side as, the pro-war NATO policymakers. We're on the same side as the arms industry. We're on the same side as the Tories.
Yeah. One final question. For anyone who would see this, who would be keen to get involved, to somehow put their weight behind the anti-war movement, or to the trade unionists who are maybe flipping on this issue, what would be your message to them?
Well, I would say get involved with Stop the War, and Stop the War actually has a trade union network that is trying to kind of influence how we can shape the trade union movement, what kind of motions we can put in, and so on. And it's not easy, but we should have meetings. And it's not that I think even people who support the war would be open. I think a lot of them would be open to having at least meetings and discussions in branches or at universities or at workplaces to actually discuss these issues. And I think that's what we need to be.
Thanks for coming down and agreeing to this interview. I was just going to say, this is our first time at this particular summit, so the first time it's running. You mentioned up on stage that you believed that there was some kind of confrontation coming.
Okay, let me explain.
Sure.
The Minimum Service Act has gone through Parliament now. What that does, it's basically requires in certain sectors, health, education, transport, fire services, border force as well. It requires a minimum service level in a dispute. The problem is the minimum service level will be defined largely by the government or the employer. The employer will be able to decide which workers have to come into work. If those workers don't come in, they refuse. All the protections that we have in law against unfair dismissal have gone, so they'll be able to be sacked. I think it'll be a recipe for trade unions to be victimised. The second thing is trade unions are supposed to cooperate. So in other words, trade unions are meant to be breaking their own strikes. If they don't cooperate, they'll be fined and funds sequestrated. What I'm saying is that actually it's so fundamental. It undermines a fundamental right of an individual worker to withdraw their labour. It undermines the whole of the trade union basis in law in this country. If that does happen, we can't let that happen. So therefore, as soon as the first union is targeted, as soon as the first worker is targeted, we've got to operate in solidarity. And that means working together, and that means industrial action in solidarity as well.
What could that functionally look like on the ground in terms of
It
linking
means people
it,
walking out. It means basically, as soon as a union is targeted or a trade union is targeted in that way and victimised in that way, we say to government, we're all coming out. Simple as that. And we've done this sort of actions in the past in solidarity to protect workers when they've been unfairly dismissed. It'll be exactly the same as that. I think what will happen is the government will try and play politics with this. They'll maybe target RMT because they want to break the union, or they'll go for a health union, the junior doctors or something like this. They want to use this as a political campaign. It's a political campaign of victimisation, but it is so fundamental, a basic human right to be able to withdraw one's labour. We've got to protect that.
Would you go so far to say this is almost like an attempt to criminalise?
Well, in fact, effectively what it does, it removes the historic right of someone to go out on strike. Then the person will, if they get targeted by the employer or by the government, they'll lose their ability to work, and as a result of that, it's effectively a blacklisting system. So I can't see any other route. It's been forced through Parliament. We tried to defeat it, we tried to amend it. It flies in the face of all the International Labour Organization conventions, so internationally it's illegal as far as we're concerned. We've tried every other mechanism to get the government to see sense. However, if it comes to it, the only other route that we've got now is industrial action in solidarity, and we've got to understand that now and start organising and gearing up for it.
Yeah. So it's safe to say this is probably the foremost issue at the front of the
trade union. It's the biggest threat to trade unionism in this country that we've had in 40 years.
All hands on deck, everyone needs to pull on the same rope.
We need to understand the implications, we need to all be out there to explain to working people what a threat this is and what we'll expect from them when it comes to it.
Do you expect there will be much pushback from senior levels of trade union organisations?
I think, it'll be interesting because at the TUC and the discussions that were taking place, a lot of general secretaries were raising this as an issue. I think there was an understanding of the implications of it, so therefore the pressure is on the TUC to do its job, which is coordinate industrial action in these sort of circumstances. If the TUC doesn't fulfil that role, I think other unions will make their own arrangements and come together.
I see. As far as like the situation is looking like the lay of the land in that situation, would you say the TUC is fulfilling its role at the moment?
Interesting enough, the TUC was part of the debate, so the resolution that was passed at the TUC was about telling the TUC it's got to play that coordinating role. We'll see in these coming months how serious that is. Statements have been made which have been pretty strong, including from the TUC General Secretary. So we're hoping the whole organisation and the whole movement lives up to those statements, because this is such a fundamental threat to our lives.
Do you think it should be... Sorry.
I've got to go,
I'm really sorry. No,
last
okay.
one.
Last one, I was going to say there was a lady in there that was raising an issue of how she felt almost like it. There was a lot of talk about putting money towards the Ukraine question at the moment, and whether or not that, would you say that counts as something of a distraction to this problem?
The issue of that increased defence spending, I think, is it's exactly what we shouldn't be spending money on. However, my position is I support the trade unionists in Ukraine that I've campaigned with and organised for the last 10 years, and their view is they've had to fight back, and I can understand that completely. But in terms of defence expenditure, they've got a high defence budget already. We don't need to be spending more on that. We need to be spending more on welfare.
There we go. So what's your name and what's your affiliation, first off?
My name is Darren Westwood. I'm an Amazon activist, currently working in VHX4 in Coventry and in dispute for the last 12 months with Amazon.
Fantastic. You're part of a fairly new unionisation effort, and you were saying earlier about there being like a history to the movement that you've been a part of, and we're starting to build up that rank and file movement again of being able to essentially almost create wildcat strikes. Would you say that's sort of becoming the case with the Amazon Union? Is it the fact that it's fairly new? Do you find there's not as much of that top-down sort of interference from a bureaucracy?
Sort of. It totally built from the bottom. There was no little bare minimum union activity inside the building, because obviously Amazon just squashed you like a fly. I mean, they spend £4 million at least a year squashing unions. So when we started back in August last year, the union involvement inside was next to nothing. But as soon as we walked out, we met with the union, we started signing people, because obviously doing wildcat strikes, you run the risk of being dismissed, not just at Amazon, across the board. So it was imperative that we sign people up, but the actual action itself was driven GMB to do Not so much what we want, but they've followed our lead, as in the dates and everything else.
Fantastic. Do you have any concerns about it becoming sort of more like the conventional old trade unions, the stereotype of the ones where the senior leadership essentially curtail the interests of the rank and file, or is that not really a concern at the moment?
I wouldn't say it's a concern at the moment. Obviously it always plays in the back of your mind. The fact that we haven't got recognition inside the building yet, so it doesn't matter. The main fight itself is to get that union through the door. That's the main.
We're still at that literal first stage of even being recognised. Yeah, absolutely. What's the situation like, in your opinion, like your experience even on the ground with people that you're trying to get organised?
The people inside are loving it because they've suddenly got a voice and they're able to not so much answer back, but they've been empowered. When I started at Amazon, I saw some managers treating people very bad.
Could you tell us more about that, maybe?
Yeah,
like
for example, I saw when I first started, you're on your feet for 10 hours a day. And this one lad sat down and the manager caught him and he made him, just to humiliate him, he made him empty every rubbish bin on that floor. And you're talking probably 300 rubbish bins and he had to go up and down each line, empty rubbish. It's not a bad thing to empty rubbish, but it was just the fact that he got that power over that person. I saw another lad, it's funny now looking back, but it's not funny. He yawned. He was opening the box and he yawned and he stepped back and just relaxed a little bit. He was seen by a manager and the manager said, "Do you want a coffee to wake you up?" And he was like, "Yeah, it'd be great." And he said, "Go and get a coffee." I never saw him again. I saw people, because we were classed as temporary workers at the time when I first started, and I saw people dismissed at the gate. You'd go to scan in to come through the turnstile and your badge wouldn't work, and the agency that were there at the time would just say, "You don't work here anymore," because you'd buzz through, the pass isn't working, they're like, "You don't work here, that's it," and they'd be gone. I was given a letter during COVID to say that this was my last week, although COVID kicked in, so they couldn't get rid of me. But yeah, they give me a letter with 1 week's notice, that it would be my last week, and the day that I should have finished was my wife's birthday. But obviously
there's been zero consideration for your situation.
It doesn't matter with them. They're a beast to be reckoned with, and this is why I said earlier, it's not about us losing. They cannot win.
Well, especially when this is the way they dehumanise people, basically. They've dehumanised you. So suffice to say, the conditions are ripe for a mutiny?
Yeah, I think we've got this. It might not be. When we first walked out, as in the strike action we took on the 25th of January, I didn't expect to wake up on the 26th, £5 an hour richer. I know this is a fight. It took Chris Small's best part of 2 years to get inside the building, and they're still not technically in there because they haven't won a contract yet, I don't think. So I know this is going to be a fight. It's going to be a fight, but
do you have like a sense of, like nationally speaking, how well it is going right now?
We need. I've said before, we need to like fire other performance centres. We can't do this alone. We can't. This is. We're taking on a monster, and Coventry's only a tiny little spot on the map. We need to fight.
You can't be isolated. You can't be the one centre. I mean, down in my neck of the woods, where I'm from, in Littlehampton, there's a whole Amazon centre there. And I mean, I don't know if they've been organised yet. It's something you just don't even hear about in the news or anything like that.
Because they blank it out. I mean, we've been to other fulfilment centres to leaflet them and talk to them, and they've said to us, we're not allowed to talk about unions, and we weren't allowed to talk about unions before we got the ball rolling. They're not allowed to discuss Coventry inside their fulfilment centres.
Bloody hell.
So they're not allowed to.
What happens if you did?
I don't know, I'm not in that side. But they were told they have all hands meetings where they literally shut it down for an hour and you can ask questions of your managers. and other fulfilment centres were told, do not ask questions about Coventry.
You said it'd be good for groups to help. Exactly who, like, is that like a blanket invitation for anyone to lend you a hand?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be doing, I'd like to do a bit of work in the background before I launch a full frontal attack.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've got some stuff we need to discuss and stuff we need to plan.
Yeah.
But the support we've had so far has been fantastic. But it's time to kick up.
Keep the momentum going. Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I was going to say that's something that I can imagine like my people would be more than happy to sink their teeth into, lend you a hand any way you need. So yeah, it seems so important at the moment. I mean, I know we recently had a guy from IWGB join up with us, and we've been trying to now support him to try and get him down to where all these gig workers are, down where we're at in Brighton. And so we're thinking, seems to be the forefront now for unionisation. It's these casualised contracts, it's these situations where, I mean, the work is like practically like a workhouse these days, you know, judging from the sounds of it.
Yeah, it reminds me if you've ever seen pictures of battery hens. That's how it looks inside. I know it sounds horrible, but that's how it is.
I mean, if it's the reality, then that's that, isn't it? You know, there's nothing more I mean, it has to be said then, so people are aware. They don't know how their package arrives on their doorstep.
It's shocking when someone orders something on Amazon Prime and that's the next day delivery. You think about how many people can be disciplined along the line if it's not out on time. And that scares me. Amazon are making the promise, but sometimes people don't have the best day. You have a bad day at work, you don't really deserve a warning. I think people need to remember that. I mean, during Black Friday, during peak, the stuff that's going out the door is unbelievable. And to think that every so often someone's going to get a warning because they haven't gone quick enough, it sort of makes you think. I mean, I won't buy a fancy anymore. I tell people not to, or if they do, just to leave a good review. You just has to pay in comments.
If you had a message, like this is just the last point, like if you had a message to put out to the public or any groups that see this and are interested in supporting your fight in any way, shape or form, what would be your message or advice to them?
If you know anyone that works at Amazon, give them a hug, see anything they can do with it. But yeah, just go down if you've got time. And you live by an Amazon fulfillment centre, if you just went down and shared this message that they deserve more, and they deserve to be paid better and treated better.
I mean, what's your role? Are you
here to discuss it with you?
I mean, if I don't know who you are, then I don't know.
Why are we not welcome? The organiser of the meeting.
Is there any reason why we're not welcome?
You know why you're here. I don't need to discuss it, you know, and we're not having any disruption from you all.
We're just participating in the meeting like anyone else.
Yeah. You're not like anyone else, you're here to disrupt the meeting.
Don't know about that.
Well, I do know about it.
What do you know about it then?
I know politics, I know why you're here to cause problems.
So you're here to shut us out from participating in the meeting?
There's no point in like you trying to push away and because Galloway is poisonous individuals. Poisonous individual.
What makes you say that?
I don't need to justify myself because he's a poisoned individual.
I don't know.
I'm not justifying myself because he's a poisoned, and this is what you're doing. So I'm not talking to you. So you best just not coming into.
I'm just curious why we're being ejected from this meeting.
Thought it was a public meeting.
Is this not a public meeting? There was no registration or anything like that.
You see fringe meeting in Unionists.
Pardon? No, sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
You're not welcome.
Why not?
Any reason?
I don't need to get
What's your name and what's the event about today?
So my name's Harry, I'm a nurse specialist and I'm with NHS Workers Say No. Today we're at the Workers' Summit, which is about rank and file trade unionists from across the country, different sectors from health, education, we've got the Amazon workers here, we've got the Mungo strikers here, coming to share their experiences really, to find out, reflect on the strike wave so far, find out what's been good, find out what's not gone so well and reflect on how we can link the fights, how we can fight to win, reject bad deals and kind of share experience really and grow as rank and file trade unionists to put the pressure on the unions to act in our interest.
Yeah, you mentioned like the linking of the fights and obviously more and more people seeing that as like a critical thing that's missing from the movement at the moment. How do you feel about say that the Trade Union Congress has just passed by and much as it's supposed to act as an organ to link fights, it doesn't seem to be doing much of that. Do you have any thoughts or ideas on what they could be doing better?
Well, it's tricky. So, I mean, my union, the RCN, isn't affiliated to the Trade Union Congress. But what we do have, so, for example, at NHS Workers Say No, we represent all of the 14 health unions as a rank and file group to put pressure on all of the health unions to work in the interest of the NHS, because in the context of the NHS, we need every single worker in there to have fair pay, and we need every vacancy filled. And I think, you know, we're linking in with Educators Say No, PCS Say No, to form a rank and file basis to that, because we believe in the power of the working class to organise themselves without direction, which is why I see hope from events like this of rank and file workers on the shop floor really taking the initiative to drive through the change they want to see. So I think it's one of those things where we've got to make it happen for ourselves. And if the unions and trade union councils, if they support us, fantastic, but we can't wait for that. We can't wait for Labour Party, particularly either, to come and rescue us. I think we've got to do it for ourselves. So that's what the events like today and some of the ones we've seen across the summer are all about.
Fantastic. And just one last question. What personally involved you in this struggle? That if you were to point to one moment that pulled you in and got you involved with organising?
I think it was mostly when the RCN balloted its members and we voted to go on strike for the first time in its 100+ year history. I think it was a real moment of realising that actually we can do something. You know, it's a historic change. We went from being a servicing union to a union that's actually going, well, hang on, what's going on? And the more you look into it, you realise the detrimental kind of aspect of policies on the NHS, the effect on patients, the effect on staff, and then being involved, obviously, I met amazing trade unions from across different unions, from the NEU, from PCS, from CWU, and realising that the strike is actually fundamental for all workers, whether you're a consultant within the NHS, whether you're a train driver, it doesn't really matter, and recognising that we've all got that shared claim. We live in a country which is more unfair than it's ever been. We're seeing shareholders' profits go up in the billions whilst we're still living under austerity, and it's got to a point where I think everyone is fed up, and it's a really powerful moment, I think, to bring people together and recognise what we share in common rather than what differences we have, and to fight together.
Yeah, brilliant. And with regards to the NHS in particular, what do you think are like the burning questions with regards to the NHS? What needs to be addressed first and most strongly?
So first, it is staff. We have over 130,000 vacancies in NHS England. We have almost 50,000 nursing vacancies alone. We need to fill those, and the only way to fill them is to address retention. The only way to address retention is to address pay. We're seeing NHS workers are down about 30% on average since 2008, and we're seeing vacancies drop at the same rate. So they are connected. We're also seeing mass privatisation of the NHS, which is something we fight against wholeheartedly, and we're seeing it being asset stripped really by this government. You know, money is in the NHS budget is being written off as PPE fraud. That comes from our pockets, that comes from patient care. So it really is under attack on multiple levels, but addressing staffing by fair pay, halting and reversing privatisation, paying off PFI debts, those are all crucial things that if the government really cared about the NHS, they would be doing straight away.
And just to clarify, it's the government that needs to be targeted for this?
Yes.
More than anyone?
100%. The government are the ones...
It's not to do with the trusts, it's not to do with the staff, or even necessarily the admins, it's the government.
It's the government. You know, people talk about, 40 million spent on this management. 14 billion was written off as PPE fraud without a question. That is money direct from the NHS purse, and it's very easy, and you know, the NHS is the biggest employer, it's a large organisation, it's easy to point to big numbers and make them seem overwhelming, but the government is gaslighting us. NHS waiting lists are at 7.7 million. When the Tories came to power, they were 2.6 million. When COVID hit, they were about 5.4 million. By the time industrial action started, they were already over 7 million. So when they turn around and say, oh, it's COVID, or it's things that are outside of our control, it's just lies, because we know that actually when you look empirically at the evidence, it's not. It's mismanagement of NHS funds. And it's easy to say that the NHS budget is bigger than ever. It's going to get bigger every year anyway. We have an ageing population with more complex care. We want it to grow. We want care to get better with it. But also we've got to look at where that money is actually going. Out of the 30 new diagnostic centres that were set up, 9 of them are private. That's a choice. There's only about 900 full-time equivalent doctors in the private sector in England, and there's about 140,000 NHS doctors. So the private sector doesn't have the capacity. They say this myth like there's these big empty hospitals with doctors and nurses just waiting to provide care. No, it's not. It's a choice to take money out of the NHS, give it to a private company. We've just seen one of the biggest Tory party donors make 135 million off NHS contracts. It's, to be honest, it's fraud, it's theft, it's robbery, pure and simple.
Brilliant. And as one last, if you had to make a last message to anyone who sees this, isn't really aware of the Workers' Summit or the individual struggle of your union, what would that be?
Just get involved, come and find out, speak to people, come to picket lines and meet the people that are actually striking. You know, the media try and misrepresent it as like it's these political movements. It's not, it's workers who are getting political because they have to. So just get involved, come and find out what we're about. Come to some of the events, get down to your local picket lines and chat to striking workers.
Hi, my name's Mona Gully and I'm the chair of Homes for All UK. And I'm here today, obviously, really supporting the Workers' Summit. And I think housing is obviously a massive issue for trade unionists. I would say get involved in your union, get involved in campaigns that affect your local community, but build a really strong and confident trade union movement and look to some of the victories that we've recently seen, you know, particularly the Camden workers. They've got a massive pay rise and, you know, improved terms and conditions, and kind of showed that all-out strike action can win. That's it.
Our pay our bills, pay our electric bills, our gas bills that just, you know, went up, like skyrocketed last year. So my employer, the NSL, came to us and proposed to us like a really small pay rise, right? The adjustment they wanted to do was about 4.5%, probably following the government's policy of 4.5%, you know, pay rise for people. We did not accept that. Originally, we used to get paid $12.70 an hour. That would amount to £28,000 a year, and we wanted to, you know, to cover the inflation. We didn't want a pay cut last year. So we started negotiations with the NSL. We started talking to them, saying, look, 57p per hour is not going to cover the inflation. It won't be able for us, you know, to pay for our bills, to come to work, you know, still with a smile on our face, to see people on the street all day, you know, to help, you know, members of the public all the time, to try to, you know, send them to park in appropriate places, ensuring they're safe on the street, you know, avoiding people, trying to make sure people do not park in pedestrian crossings, you see. That happens quite a lot. And the NSL said it was ridiculous. It was absurd, it was unreasonable, and it would make the business unsustainable. If you go on strike, you go all in. And that was in our policies as well, that's what I'm talking about.
So I work in the NHS and I'm a Unison rep, but also since 2020 I've been involved with NHS Workers Say No. And I'm going to talk about why we need to organise with our unions, but why we also need to organise separately from our unions as well if we need to. So I'll start by saying how I got involved with NHS Workers Say No. So in 2020, the NHS faced, obviously everyone knows, a really horrific time, and NHS workers were some of the few going to work while people around the country were on lockdown. And I think that's one of the first times that I really saw the limitations of our unions, because imagine this, I'm going into work, I'm faced with infectious patients on our wards dying in droves, and we were in chaos. We didn't know what PPE was right. It was terrifying, and Boris Johnson in power didn't help things at all. I really expected Unison to shine at this stage, because I had perceived them as being the union of health and safety, and that's what I thought. This is one of the things they're really good at, and I was expecting them to, you know, come to our rescue a bit, I suppose. But instead, I found they shut their offices and their call centres, because they didn't want to, rightly so I suppose, they didn't want to put their paid staff at risk. But that meant that we weren't able to get support from them. And imagine how I felt as a frontline NHS worker. I didn't have that option to stay at home and protect myself, and it left me feeling under-supported. So health and safety advice on PPE and safety precautions, we were looking into that ourselves as NHS workers. We were reading things, we were sharing the research online, and the reps in the branch were having to go to the hospital management and beg for better PPE without support, I suppose, from the union more widely. And I had a really bad time, like a lot of people, and it completely changed the way that I would relate to unions forever. And a few months later, we've been working with COVID patients all this time. We hear the government doesn't want to give us a pay rise. And I heard that NHS workers were gathering at Downing Street to protest, and I went down and I joined in, because we were disgusted. We'd been having the fight of our life at work, and the government was just counting it for nothing. And this protest had been called by NHS Workers Say No. So meanwhile, our own unions were saying to us, don't go, stay at home, this is for safety reasons, and they
felt like they didn't understand that we were in danger every day. We were working in hospitals, we were working with COVID patients day in, day out, so it was ridiculous to say don't go to a protest. It just felt like there was a massive disconnect there, and where that disconnect started, NHS workers say no, it just seemed to explode out of it, demanding a pay rise of 15%. And that's just an example of how unions can be totally out of step with what's happening to members on the ground. And that's why what workers want and what the union leaders want is not always the same thing, because they aren't there going through the same things as us, I guess. So move forward to what happened with the RCN vote this year, a bit of a jump in time. So Unison and the RCN had shifted the government to offer more money, and that was via strike action, and that was fantastic. But the money that was being offered, it just wasn't enough still, but we were being encouraged to accept. So NHS workers say they managed to organise around the country to overturn the recommendation of the RCN. But that was a real victory, and often members aren't happy with the pay award, but they accept it because they trust their union when they say that's all that you can win. And in this case, members on the ground, they showed that they weren't prepared to go along with what the union advised them to accept. So just to conclude, I suppose, I would say we have to organise with our unions. So it's really important, obviously, when I visited the Unison picket line of HCAs in the Wirral last week, it was really impressive, I felt really proud, and our unions have the ability to reach huge amounts of people and organise them, and that's fantastic. We want that, we want a lot more of that. However, there'll be many times when it's not enough, where they aren't doing the things that we want or they aren't doing anything. And particularly in the NHS, we have 14 different unions representing members, and it often feels like they're competing with each other, when what members want is for them to work together. To know what to say when members ask you, why are you not striking on the same day? Why are you not calling for the same pay claims that other unions? It's really difficult. So what we must all do now is to work together with the other unions. And at our hospital, we've organised protests to support the RCN. When the RCN's been striking at other hospitals, we've always supported the available. We're not in competition with each other when we're providing patient care, absolutely not. So why would we regard those same colleagues as anything other than colleagues in the fight for decent pay? Because we all deserve that pay rise.
As was said, my name is Ellie Clark, and I am a PCS rep in the Cabinet Office, and I'm speaking to you today on behalf of the PCS Say No campaign. So back in 2022, just as the energy crisis was hitting and it was becoming extremely clear that inflation was going to get out of control, civil servants were offered a 2% pay rise, which I believe was the worst in the entire public sector. And this was particularly painful because it came off the back of almost constant pay freezes and pay restraints since 2010. Pay freezes that resulted in really significant real terms pay cuts for civil servants. Thousands of us were already on minimum wage and having to claim in-work benefits. Many reported relying on food banks and running up significant amounts of debt just to survive. I pretty much lived in my overdraft every month. And as if that pay offer wasn't insulting enough, we were also being used as political punching bags for the right of the Tory party. This was around the same time that Jacob Rees-Mogg was planning to axe $91,000 of us. So in September that year, PCS launched a disaggregated ballot for strike action, and by November, we had smashed the threshold in almost every significant employer. We had an 80% yes vote on a 69% turnout, which is the biggest mandate for industrial action we have ever had. From the outset of our dispute, there were issues with the leadership and the strategy. We sat on live mandates for months, we telegraphed our next steps, and there was hardly any all-out national action. But despite this, our strikes were really, really strong. Central government departments had huge picket lines, mostly made up of young workers from incredibly diverse backgrounds. At the height of my picket line, there must have been at least 60 people stood outside the Cabinet Office, and the vast majority of them were young women. There haven't been picket lines like this in living memory in Whitehall. Something really big was happening in the civil service, and it was happening in conjunction with teachers, nurses, postal workers, railway workers, and many others in the public sector. And we all understood what we were fighting for. Fundamentally, our demand was for a 10% consolidated pay rise that would be underpinned by a minimum of £15 an hour. We also wanted job security and an end to overpayment on our pensions. Then in June 2023, the government, out of nowhere, announced that they were going to give civil servants a non-consolidated bonus of £1,500, which was taxable, it was going to be prorated, and it was subject to student loans. Also, probably the most shameful thing is that workers who were on in-work benefits and got this payment would then have it taken back out of their universal credit payments. So, we also already knew at this point that the pay agreement for 23-24 would be 4.5%, which is still massively below inflation and a real terms pay cut for our members. Yet despite all of this, and despite the fact that we were going to get the money no matter what we did, our leadership decided that this was a good enough deal to effectively call off our disputes. And it was at this point that we decided to set up the PCS Say No campaign. Our campaign was a grassroots one started by a number of PCS branches. We obviously didn't accept that 1,500 and the worst pay deal in the entire public sector was adequate to settle our disputes. So we agreed to launch a broad, branch-based campaign, say that 10 times fast, to reject the offer and to escalate the fight. Ultimately, we have actually been sold out by our leadership, but there are a lot of positives that did come from our campaign, and not least of which is that we created a truly cross-factional campaign that reached thousands and thousands of rank and file members. It included reps and members from lots of different left groups, ones who were not politically aligned at all, and members who didn't even really consider themselves to be political to begin with. By galvanising all these disparate elements around the basic fundamental principle that our union should be democratic and that it's not okay for our leaders to go into rooms with ministers and get an oven-ready deal, to borrow a phrase from Boris Johnson, and then force us to accept it, we managed to galvanise thousands and thousands of workers around us. The only reason that they won the ballot in the end was because they pivoted, they obfuscated, and they lied to members. So they made it look on the ballot as though voting for yes was a vote to continue the dispute, when actually what they meant was voting for yes was a vote to call off strike action. Yeah. Since then, many members have come forward to me to tell me that they are absolutely disgusted with what happened, and if they knew what they were voting for, they would have voted the other way around. Yeah. So our campaign has now pivoted, and what we are looking to do is we are looking to pressure the union leadership, the current union leadership, to actually continue the dispute, as they told our members that they will do. And while they may have won the immediate battle, they have not won the war, and we will carry on. And a big part of what's happening at the moment is that we are having elections for our General Secretary and for our Assistant General Secretary. And whether the leadership like it or not, the rank and file activists know that the candidates that were always on our side were John Maloney and Marion Lloyd. Every single one of them spoke openly about how we should continue the dispute. And so while PCS Say No is not supposed to be an electoral force, it was never meant to be an electoral force, many of our rank and file activists are now pumping their energy into that campaign. So I'm going to sum up there because I realise I've gone on too long.